Text-dependent analysis. Read the quote below and answer the two questions in complete sentences. You do not have to write the question, but your answers must be a complete sentence. Benjamin Franklin said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." What does this statement mean? Do you agree with the statement? Why or why not? Okay, let's look at what the standard says that we need to know for mastery. Write informative, explanatory text that develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing, and rewriting. What are some other words for planning when writing an essay? What are some ways you plan for essays? T-charts, graphic organizers, yep, list too. How about webs? Do you have any other ideas? So what is your objective today? What is the I can statement or target? I can understand and apply a strategy for planning a text-dependent analysis essay. So what is a text-dependent analysis essay anyway? It's an essay that answers a question about a text or texts. Don't let the word essay intimidate you at all. An essay is basically a multi-paragraph response to a question. So we just covered what an essay was. Let's go over a couple more terms so we make sure that we understand what is being asked. Don't forget to fill these in on your guided notes paper too. So we said an essay is a multi-paragraph response to a question. So what exactly is text? No, I'm not talking about the coded way of communicating with your friends on your cell phone. I'm talking about the document or story or article that you are given to read before you answer a question about it. Okay, next is evidence. Evidence is going to be the facts or information that you get from the story or article that proves your belief or your argument. To cite something means to quote it. So when we quote something, we have to copy word for word, but give credit by putting quotation marks around it. And textual evidence? Well, that should be easy. It's evidence from the text. Evidence will be sentences or lines or words the author used to support your argument. And the last thing, let's take a minute to do a quick review of the ACE method. A is where you answer the question. You are restating the question using a complete sentence and using keywords from the question in your answer. The next part of your answer should cite the text and use evidence to prove your answer in the first part. You can begin this section with sentence starters such as, in the article I read that, or the article states, the text stated, in the text it says, or even the author wrote, followed by an exact quote from the article or from the story. Don't forget, put quotation marks around words that are not yours. And last, you get to explain how your evidence supports your answer. To begin this section, you can use sentence starters such as so, or that tells me, or that means, or even therefore, and then go on to explain how the evidence showed you something new or connects to your answer. Alright, those are the terms we're going to need to do this activity. Let's keep going. There are 8 steps to planning for a text-dependent analysis, or TDA. Let's go over them and make sure we know how to do this. Don't forget, complete these steps on your guided notes. Step 1. We are going to read and break down the question by circling and defining keywords. We're going to rewrite the question into an unfinished statement. Unfinished means it's not going to be a complete sentence. Read the passage with a purpose and look for evidence to answer our question. Did you catch that? Read with a purpose and look for evidence. Don't just read, but pay attention to what you're reading. Alright, we're going to use a T-chart. Everybody remember what a T-chart is? Yep, it looks like a T and has 2 sides. One side is for evidence, and one side is for how the evidence answers the question. We're going to finish the statement with 2 reasons or points. So we're just looking for 2 main reasons. We're going to place a 1 or a 2 next to the piece of evidence in the T-chart. The piece of evidence for 1 will go in the first body paragraph. First body. And the pieces of evidence for number 2 will go in the second body paragraph. Then we're going to make a 4-square graphic organizer. Alright, we'll get to that later. Write your essay and you will find that most of it is already done. Okay, so let's look at just step 1. We're going to read and break down the question by circling and defining keywords. By question, I mean the one on your test. And yes, I want you to circle words in your test booklet to make sure we understand what's being asked. Here's a sample prompt with a quote. The quote says, Sylvia tried to ignore the small pang in her midsection as she walked. Do you notice the quotation marks? That means this line was in the story that we're about to read. The question asks us to write an essay analyzing how the quote represents Sylvia's conflict, and we're supposed to use evidence from the text to support your response. Let's start by trying to guess what that quote even means. Right there. Why did she have a pain in her midsection? Was she really hungry? Does she have a stomach virus? Is Sylvia just really nervous or worried? I'm going to think about that as I read the story. So what is the key word in my question? Write an essay analyzing how the quote represents Sylvia's conflict. Conflict looks like it is the key word. So what does conflict even mean? The conflict is the problem that a character faces in a story. There are internal, which means human versus self, something that happens within the character. And external conflicts, human versus human, meaning 2 characters have an argument or disagreement or some kind of conflict. human versus nature, where maybe there's a storm that's in the way of a human or a character, or human versus society. Those are bigger problems that a character may be facing with society as a whole. As I read, I better look out for different conflicts that Sylvia may be facing in the story. I'll keep that in mind. Okay, so I've read the question, and I've broken it down for keywords, and now I'm reading with a purpose. Well, first, I need to rewrite the question into an unfinished statement. This sounds a whole lot like Step A in ACE, or restating the question. So my question said, Sylvia tried to ignore the small pang in her midsection as she walked, and I'm supposed to write an essay analyzing how the quote represents Sylvia's conflict. So I could write my statement unfinished by starting out with, the quote represents Sylvia's conflict because. Now I have a purpose, and now I've got the beginning of my statement. Alright, on to step 3. Now we're ready to read. We're going to read the passage with a purpose and look for evidence to answer the question. Based on the question, well, what is our purpose for reading? We are going to read to look for conflict in the story. Conflict, remember, it's something internal for the character, or it's a conflict between two characters, or between the character and nature, or between the character and society as a whole. We're also going to read to look for textual evidence about conflict in the story. So I'm looking for sentences and lines and ideas from the passage that support the conflict I think is going on. Okay, so I'm going to read the story, and keep in mind I'm reading to look for conflict and evidence of conflict in the story. Shared vision. Sylvia, did you hear about the school's new mural design competition? I totally have a great idea for it, and I'm going to enter, Carol yelled as she trotted towards Sylvia from across the cafeteria. Sylvia nearly dropped the pen she had been using to sketch her own possible mural design. She smoothly slid her notebook over the sketch as Carol plopped down on the empty seat beside her. Really? That sounds like fun. Carol smiled. Winning is always fun, my friend. I'm going to get busy. As Carol sailed away, Sylvia slumped in her seat, ignoring the din of the cafeteria crowd around her. Chewing on the tip of her pen, she pulled out her sketch and looked at it critically. How will Carol feel if I compete against her? Sylvia wondered. Several blue ribbons already adorned Carol's walls from community center art shows. Carol was the most competitive person Sylvia knew, and she also happened to be Sylvia's best friend. It probably was silly for her to even think about entering it if it meant competing with Carol. The thought made her feet feel like thick mud was stuck to the soles of her shoes. She stuffed the sketch in her notebook, slammed the cover closed, and vowed to worry about her dilemma later. As the girls walked home that afternoon, Carol jabbered nonstop. Words raced out of her mouth so fast they bumped into each other. I've got this new paint set I'll use to paint the tiger, our school mascot, of course, jumping over the school banner in blue for our school's color. Isn't that great? Not really, Sylvia thought. She realized for the first time that she could possibly win, even with Carol in the running. Carol's idea was not particularly original, and the winner wouldn't be painting the mural, only contributing to the design. Still, if she won the contest, she wasn't sure how Carol would respond. When Carol came in second at the talent show last year, she didn't speak to the winner for 2 months. Was winning a competition worth endangering their friendship? Carol made her laugh. I'm going to stop there for just a second. Do you notice how the writer put words in italics? Right here. And again right here. These are thoughts going on inside of Sylvia's head. She is not saying them out loud to Carol, and Carol doesn't know that Sylvia is thinking these. So this is what is considered an internal conflict. It is something inside of her. Carol made gooey chocolate chip cookies and giggled over old movies with her. It was just a design contest. Skipping it would not hurt anything, really. Sylvia tried to ignore the small pang in her midsection as she walked. Let's stop here. Do you notice? This is the quotation from our question. Remember, we're reading for a purpose. So if this is the part of the story where she started to feel pain in her stomach, maybe it has something to do with this art contest. All week, Sylvia couldn't keep her mind off the competition. Her design was good and she knew it. A mosaic of various images, her design captured the diversity of their school and the wide variety of talents and interests of the student body. Maybe she should just tell Carol. She could casually mention she had been thinking of ideas for the school mural and that she might enter too. Relaxed, laid back, no drama. What? Carol screeched, then promptly burst into laughter when Sylvia shared the news. Really? Since when do you draw anyway? Sylvia felt her throat tighten and her eyes burn. When Carol told her about her idea, had she laughed? Laugh all you want, but I'm going to enter, and I might just win. Sylvia stomped off, her steps as thunderous as those of a giant. Okay, let's hold up a minute. This section of the story is some drama between Carol and Sylvia. Carol is laughing at Sylvia for entering the art contest. And Carol is telling her that she's going to enter anyway. This part is an external conflict, and it's between two different characters. So that is human versus human conflict. That afternoon, with fierce concentration, Sylvia did not stop until she had finished her very best version of the design. With her jaw jutted out, Sylvia quickly left to mail her completed work before she had time to change her mind. Walking back to the apartment, Sylvia saw Carol waiting for her by the door. Sylvia's step slowed, her mouth straightened, and her lips thinned to a pencil line. As she approached, Carol stood up and offered Sylvia a small box with a ribbon on it. Go ahead, open it, even if you are mad at me, Carol stated without any initial greeting. Sylvia waited, unsure if she wanted to do anything Carol requested. Please, Carol added. Sylvia took the box and opened it. Inside was Carol's new paint set. She looked up at Carol with raised eyebrows. I'm sorry about earlier. That was really wrong, and I'd like to give you these to make up for it. Sylvia smiled, but handed back the paint set. Carol, I appreciate that, but keep your paints. You're going to need them for your design. She winked. Sylvia felt sure that no matter who won, they would both be okay. Want to come inside? Sylvia continued. There's a brand new bag of chocolate chips just begging to become cookies. With an exaggerated sigh of relief, Carol stepped inside, and both girls laughed as the door closed gently behind them. Okay, so we've read it once. Now let's go ahead and use a T-chart. One side for evidence, and one side for how the evidence answers the question. Remember, we're looking for conflict, and evidence of conflict in the story. The first piece of evidence I saw was a quote that said, "How will Carol feel if I compete against her?" Sylvia wondered. This is evidence of an internal conflict. This answers that question by saying Sylvia is entering the same mural design competition as her best friend Carol, who is very competitive. She doesn't want her friend to be angry with her, but she wants to enter too. So she's got a conflict. She's got a struggle within herself to decide what to do and what is right. So I think you have the idea now. Here's a list of some of the quotes and evidence that I found and some reasons that supports our argument about conflict in the story. Take a minute and fill out your guided notes. You will need it for the next step when you put it together. Okay, it looks like I'm ready for step 5. I'm ready to go back to that first statement that I made in step 2, where it said the quote represents Sylvia's conflict because, well, now I want to finish the statement with 2 points or reasons. The quote represents Sylvia's conflict because Her problem starts as an internal conflict, but is only resolved when it becomes an external conflict. Remember, she started out by keeping her feelings to herself and not expressing them to Carol. Later, when she tells Carol how she feels and becomes an external conflict, then things finally get settled. Alright, on to step 6. Now we're going to go back to our T-chart and we're going to put a 1 or a 2 next to the piece of evidence in the chart. The piece of evidence for point 1 will go in your first body paragraph. Remember, point 1 was evidence of an internal conflict. So let's remember that. Internal conflict. And the pieces of evidence for point 2 will go in our second body paragraph. This was evidence of an external conflict. Okay, so now let me get this straight. I need to put a 1 next to the evidence and the answers that represent an internal conflict, and I need to put a 2 next to the answers and the evidence that represent an external conflict. Now remember, internal is something that is inside. Sylvia's head, not a conversation that Sylvia has with Carol, or action between Carol and Sylvia. So this first one, B, was winning worth endangering their friendship. That is something that Sylvia thought inside of her head. And that shows for my explanation that says she thinks she can win, but she does not want to end her friendship with Carol. So this is just a thought that Sylvia had. So this is a 1, and this is a 1. Now the next one, Sylvia tried to ignore the small pang in her midsection. Again, that quote is not a conversation with Carol. It is something Sylvia is thinking inside of her head. So that's going to go in my first paragraph too, along with the explanation. Now, D, she finally tells Carol, but Carol laughs in her face. Since when do you draw anyway? This is a conversation between Sylvia and Carol. So this is an external conflict. This is going to get a number 2, along with the explanation. The next one, Sylvia stomped off, her steps as thunderous as those of a giant. That's still part of that external conflict between Sylvia and Carol. So that's going to go with a number 2 again. Sylvia did not stop until she had finished her very best version of the design. With her jaw jutted out, Sylvia quickly left to mail her complete work before she had time to change her mind. This situation still has to do with the conflict between Sylvia and Carol and her entering the art competition. So this is still going to get a number 2. Now, Carol gives her paint set as a gift and says, "I'm sorry about earlier." This is a conversation between Sylvia and Carol, so this is external as well. This is going to get a number 2 again. Sylvia gives back the paint set and says, "You'll need them for your design." This is again more the conversation with Carol and Sylvia, starting to resolve the conflict, but still part of number 2. Sylvia felt sure that no matter who won, they would both be okay. This is part of the resolution to the conflict with Carol, so this is still a number 2. Wow, when I look at this T-chart and see all of this planning, it looks like I'm about ready to write. But hold on a minute. Let's go back to our original objective for the day. The I can statement, the learning target. My goal today was to be able to understand and apply a strategy for planning a text-dependent analysis essay. So yeah, I think I've got it. It's all planned out and ready to write. I met my goal today.